Trembling, Jasmine Washington watches as airline operations grind to a halt on monitors throughout Atlanta International. 500 delayed flights, thousands stranded, and it all began hours earlier when a flight attendant demanded she and her twin brother move from first class. Their father's voice echoes, "They picked the wrong family." Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to catch more stories of justice being served. Now let's see how a simple flight turned into an airline's worst nightmare. Jasmine and Isaiah Washington were not your average 17-year-old twins. As the children of Malcolm Washington, self-made tech billionaire and CEO of Washington Digital Enterprises, they had grown up with privileges most teenagers could only dream of. However, their father, having risen from poverty in South Chicago, made sure his children remained grounded despite their wealth. Being black in America means you'll have to work twice as hard for half the recognition, Malcolm often told them. And people will always question whether you belong in the spaces you've earned the right to occupy. That Saturday morning in their Atlanta mansion, the twins sat at the breakfast table, excitement evident in their eyes. They were flying to Boston for a weekend college tour of Harvard, MIT, and Boston College, their first trip alone without parents. "I upgraded you both to first class," Malcolm said, spreading jam on his toast. "You've earned it. Jasmine, you're on track to be valedictorian, and Isaiah, salutatorian. I'm proud of you both." Jasmine straightened her shoulders. With a 4.8 GPA and perfect SAT scores, she had already received early interest from several Ivy League schools for her research in artificial intelligence. Isaiah, only 0.2 of a point behind her academically, was a gifted mathematician who had published 2 papers in respected journals despite his young age. "Remember," Malcolm continued, setting down his coffee, "people will stare. Some might even make comments. Keep your heads high, be polite, and document everything if there's an issue." "Dad, we know," Isaiah said, adjusting his glasses. His curly hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore a casual but expensive navy blue button-down shirt with dark jeans. "We've been through this before." "Let him finish," Jasmine said softly. Unlike her brother's conservative style, she embraced her natural hair in a glorious afro and wore a stylish yellow jumpsuit with white sneakers. Around her neck hung a custom pendant, a gift from her father when she won the National Science Fair. Malcolm nodded gratefully at his daughter. "This is different. You'll be alone, in spaces where black teenagers aren't commonly seen. First class is predominantly white business travelers. Remember what I taught you. Be twice as polite, half as loud, and document everything," the twins recited together. Their mother, Leona Washington, a prominent neurosurgeon, entered the kitchen. "And call us if anything happens," she added, kissing each of them on the forehead. "Anything at all." 3 hours later, the twins arrived at Atlanta International Airport, Louis Vuitton luggage in tow. The check-in process went smoothly until they reached security. Despite having TSA pre-check, they were pulled aside for random additional screening. Isaiah's jaw tightened as a TSA agent rifled through his carry-on bag, examining each item with unnecessary scrutiny. Jasmine caught her brother's eye and subtly shook her head, silently reminding him of their father's advice, "Don't react." After 20 minutes of extra screening that passengers with lighter skin didn't seem to receive, they were finally allowed through, only to face curious and sometimes suspicious glances as they made their way to the first-class lounge. "It's starting already," Isaiah muttered as they settled into plush seats in the lounge. Jasmine pulled out her tablet to review the college itinerary. "We knew it would. Remember what Dad said, we've earned our place. Don't let them make you doubt it." Little did they know that their real test was yet to come, and that their father's lessons would be put to use sooner than expected. First-class passengers for Skyline Air Flight 372 to Boston may now begin boarding. Jasmine and Isaiah gathered their belongings and joined the short line of business executives and wealthy travelers at the priority boarding gate. They stood out immediately, 2 black teenagers among a sea of predominantly middle-aged white passengers in business attire. "Are you sure you're in the right line?" asked a gate agent, eyeing their boarding passes with suspicion. "Yes, we're in first class," Jasmine replied politely, handing over their documents. The agent's eyebrows rose slightly, but she scanned their passes and returned them without further comment. As they walked down the jet bridge, Isaiah whispered, "One down, many more to go." They found their seats, 1A and 1B, the premier spots in first class. Isaiah took the window while Jasmine settled into the aisle seat. Around them, business travelers in expensive suits stowed luggage and prepared for the flight. Several cast curious glances at the teenagers, some with undisguised surprise or disapproval. A balding executive in his 50s, who would later identify himself as Bradley Reynolds, chief operating officer of a manufacturing firm, took the seat across the aisle. He immediately frowned upon seeing the twins. "Looks like they're letting anyone up here these days," he muttered to his seatmate, just loud enough for the twins to hear. "Probably some affirmative action program. Back in my day, you had to earn your way to first class." Isaiah's knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest, but he remained silent, remembering his father's warnings. The lead flight attendant, a blonde woman in her 40s with "Heather Brooks" on her name tag, approached their row. Her smile faltered when she saw the twins. "Excuse me, but these are first-class seats. Are you sure you're in the right section?" she asked, despite the fact that they were already settled in their assigned spots. "Yes, we're certain," Jasmine replied evenly, presenting their boarding passes. "Seats 1A and 1B." Heather examined their boarding passes with unnecessary scrutiny. "I see. Well, let me know if you need help understanding how things work up here." As she walked away, Isaiah and Jasmine exchanged glances. This was exactly what their father had prepared them for. The flight began boarding in earnest, with more passengers filing through. The service difference was immediately apparent. While other first-class passengers received warm greetings and offers of pre-flight beverages, Heather merely nodded curtly at the twins before moving on. "What would you like to drink?" she eventually asked them, her tone noticeably cooler than when addressing other passengers. "Sparkling water, please," Jasmine said. "Same for me," Isaiah added. Heather returned with their drinks but placed them on their trays without a napkin, unlike the careful presentation other passengers received. Throughout the boarding process, she kept glancing at them as if expecting trouble. When a white businessman accidentally spilled his champagne, Heather rushed over with extra napkins and a sympathetic smile. "Don't worry about it at all, sir. These things happen." Minutes later, when Isaiah shifted in his seat and inadvertently bumped his sparkling water, creating a small spill, Heather's reaction was dramatically different. "Please be more careful," she snapped. "These seats are expensive and not easily cleaned." The businessman across the aisle, Bradley Reynolds, smirked. "First time in the front of the plane, kids." Jasmine dabbed at the small spill with a tissue from her purse, since Heather hadn't offered any napkins. "Actually, we fly regularly," she responded calmly. "Just usually with our parents." "And who might they be?" Reynolds asked condescendingly. Isaiah, following his father's advice to avoid unnecessary confrontation, simply said, "We'd rather not say." This exchange caught the attention of the head flight attendant, a man in his 50s named Kevin Porter, who came over to investigate. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking directly at the twins rather than at Reynolds. "No problem at all," Jasmine answered politely. Kevin's eyes narrowed. "Heather mentioned you spilled a drink. You know, first class requires a certain maturity. If you'd be more comfortable, we can find seats for you in the main cabin." The suggestion hung in the air, dripping with implication. Around them, several passengers were watching the interaction unfold. "We're perfectly comfortable here, thank you," Isaiah replied, his voice tight but controlled. "These are our assigned seats." Kevin and Heather exchanged glances. "Well, if there are any further disruptions," Kevin said, emphasizing the last word, "we may need to reconsider the seating arrangement for everyone's comfort." As they walked away, Reynolds leaned across the aisle. Listen, kids, this isn't a school bus. Some of us paid good money to sit up here and have a peaceful flight. So did we, Jasmine replied evenly. Or rather, our father did. The situation escalated when the plane's departure was delayed due to air traffic. Passengers became restless, and Heather seemed to focus her frustration on the twins. Please keep your voices down, she admonished, despite the fact that they had barely spoken above a whisper. We weren't even talking, Isaiah protested. Don't argue with me, Heather snapped, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. That's exactly the kind of behavior that doesn't belong in first class. Several passengers began filming the interaction with their phones. The confrontation drew the attention of the pilot, Captain Raymond Simmons, who emerged from the cockpit to assess the situation. What seems to be the problem, he asked, his gaze immediately focusing on the twins. These young passengers are being disruptive, Heather reported before the twins could speak. They've spilled drinks, argued with the crew, and disturbed other passengers. That's not true, Jasmine began, but Captain Simmons held up a hand to silence her. I don't have time for this. Either you comply with the flight attendant's instructions and behave appropriately, or I'll have you removed from the aircraft. His tone left no room for discussion. Jasmine felt tears of frustration forming but refused to let them fall. Isaiah's face had gone completely still, the expression he wore when suppressing intense emotion. May I use the restroom? Jasmine asked, her voice remarkably steady. Make it quick, the pilot replied. In the privacy of the first-class lavatory, Jasmine pulled out her phone and called her father. As she explained the situation, her composure finally cracked, and her voice trembled. They're humiliating us, Dad. Just like you said they might. They want to move us to coach even though we haven't done anything wrong. On the other end of the line, Malcolm Washington's voice was calm but tight with controlled anger. Put me on speaker when you get back to your seat. Don't leave the plane unless they physically remove you. I'm on my way. Malcolm Washington sat at the head of a glass conference table, surrounded by his executive team and potential investors for a new artificial intelligence project. At 52, he cut an impressive figure, 6'2" with salt and pepper hair, wearing a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly salary. Despite growing up in poverty, he'd built Washington Digital Enterprises from nothing into a tech empire worth billions. His phone vibrated. Normally, he would never answer during such an important meeting, but seeing Jasmine's name flash on the screen triggered immediate concern. His children never called during business hours unless it was an emergency. Excuse me, he said to the room, rising from his chair. I need to take this. Family matter. The investors exchanged glances as Malcolm stepped out. In the hallway, he answered, Jasmine. What's wrong? As his daughter explained the situation, Malcolm's expression darkened. Through the speakerphone, he could hear the flight attendant's condescending tone, the pilot's thinly veiled threats, and the businessman's snide comments. They're humiliating us, Dad. Just like you said they might. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, memories flooding back. Despite his success, his company's technology powered half the airlines in the country, including Skyline Air. He'd faced similar treatment countless times. Just 3 months ago, at a financial conference in New York, a security guard had stopped him entering the VIP section despite his name badge clearly identifying him as a keynote speaker. Put me on speaker when you get back to your seat, he instructed Jasmine. Don't leave the plane unless they physically remove you. I'm on my way. Malcolm returned to the conference room, his decision already made. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but I need to postpone this meeting. My children are experiencing racial discrimination on a Skyline Air flight right now, and I need to address this immediately. The room fell silent. Then Vanessa Chen, one of the potential investors, spoke up. Go. As a mother, I understand. We'll reschedule. Malcolm nodded gratefully before stepping out and immediately making 3 calls. First, to his head of legal affairs, Terrence Mitchell. Terrence, I need you to meet me at Atlantic Aviation Private Terminal in 30 minutes. Bring the corporate discrimination response team and contact our outside counsel. Second, to his Chief Technology Officer. James, initiate Protocol 7 for Skyline Air. Yes, the full suspension. This is not a drill. Finally, to Harold Blackman, Skyline Air's CEO, whom Malcolm had met at several industry functions. When the call went to voicemail, Malcolm's message was brief: Harold, this is Malcolm Washington. Your airline is currently discriminating against my children on Flight 372 to Boston. Fix it immediately, or I'll be forced to take actions that will significantly impact your operations. Call me within the next 5 minutes. As he strode toward the elevator, his executive assistant hurrying alongside him, Malcolm was already mentally calculating his next moves. Few people knew that Washington Digital Enterprises provided the critical operating software for Skyline Air's entire ticketing, boarding, and flight management systems. Fewer still knew that Malcolm's company held a significant portion of Skyline Air's stock through various investment vehicles. Rebecca, he said to his assistant, contact Atlantic Aviation. I need the jet ready immediately for Boston. Then call Jasmine back and stay on the line with her. Record everything. And get me the contact information for the FAA's regional director, the one who played golf with me last month. In the executive parking garage, Malcolm slid into his Tesla and sped toward the private aviation terminal. His phone rang. It was Harold Blackman returning his call. Malcolm, what's going on? I just got your message. Harold, my 17-year-old twins are in first class on your Flight 372 to Boston. They're being harassed by your crew who are threatening to remove them without cause, solely because they're black teenagers in first class. I'm sure there must be some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Malcolm cut in, his voice ice cold. I heard it myself. Your staff is humiliating my children in front of a plane full of passengers because they don't think black kids belong in first class. Malcolm, You have exactly 30 minutes to personally intervene and fix this situation, or I will be forced to temporarily suspend your access to our operations platform for emergency maintenance. I don't think I need to explain what that would mean for your airline. There was a long pause on the line. Are you threatening to shut down our systems? I'm informing you that racial discrimination against my family will have consequences. 30 minutes, Harold. Meanwhile, on the plane, Jasmine had returned to her seat with her phone on speaker, hidden in her lap. Isaiah looked at her questioningly. Dad's coming, she whispered. He said to stay put and record everything. The flight was still at the gate due to the earlier delay. Captain Simmons had returned to the cockpit, but Heather and Kevin continued to hover near the twins, watching their every move. Maybe we should just move to coach, Isaiah suggested quietly. This is getting out of hand. No, Jasmine said firmly. Dad said we earned these seats and we shouldn't let them push us out. That's exactly what they want. The businessman across the aisle, Bradley Reynolds, was still making occasional comments to his seatmate. Entitlement culture. When I was their age, I was working summer jobs, not flying first class. Jasmine turned slightly, ensuring her phone was capturing his comments as well. Over the plane's PA system, the captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the continued delay. We're experiencing some technical difficulties with our departure clearance. We appreciate your patience." What the passengers didn't know was that Malcolm's call to his friend at the FAA had resulted in a special maintenance inspection requirement being issued for the aircraft, preventing its departure. As tensions on the plane continued to rise, Malcolm Washington was speeding toward the airport, his corporate jet being prepped and his legal team assembling. The wheels were in motion for a response that Skyline Air never saw coming. While the drama unfolded on Skyline Air Flight 372, passenger Meredith Lawson, seated 2 rows behind the twins, had been quietly filming the entire confrontation on her phone. A marketing executive with a substantial social media following, she didn't hesitate to upload a 60-second clip to her accounts with the caption, watching two unruly teens disrupt first class and refusing to comply with crew instructions. #AirRage #entitled teens. The video showed Heather asking the twins to keep it down and Captain Simmons warning them about their behavior, but critically omitted the minutes before where the twins had been sitting quietly. Within minutes, the clip had been shared thousands of times, with commenters quick to judge. This is why kids don't belong in first class. Parents need to teach respect. They should be removed from the flight. But the narrative took a dramatic turn when Patricia Green, a professor at Boston College seated in the last row of first class, recognized the twins. She had been corresponding with Jasmine about her artificial intelligence research for months and had been planning to meet her during the college visit. Patricia immediately posted her own video showing the twins' calm demeanor and the unprovoked harassment. "I'm witnessing racial profiling in real time on #SkylineAir. These unruly teens are actually Jasmine and Isaiah Washington, brilliant academic stars and children of Malcolm Washington, CEO of Washington Digital. They've been nothing but polite while being harassed. #FlyingWhileBlack." Patricia's video included Bradley Reynolds' comments about affirmative action and the different treatment the twins received compared to other passengers. Her post, combined with her academic credentials, lent credibility to the counter-narrative. Within an hour, both videos had gone viral, and news outlets began picking up the story. SkylineAir's social media team, unaware of the high-profile nature of the passengers involved, issued a standard response. "SkylineAir takes all passenger concerns seriously. Our crew is trained to ensure a comfortable experience for everyone on board. We are looking into this matter." This generic statement only fueled the fire as more passengers from the flight began sharing their perspectives online. The hashtags #WashingtonTwins and #SkylineAirRacism started trending nationally. Malcolm's PR team, already alerted to the situation, activated their crisis response protocol. They contacted friendly journalists and influential social media figures, providing context about the twins' academic achievements and their father's commitment to educational equity. Famous actors, musicians, and athletes who had connections to Malcolm or benefited from his philanthropic work began weighing in. Basketball superstar LeBron James tweeted, "This is why I tell my kids they have to be 10 times better just to be seen as equal. Proud of these young scholars for their dignity under fire." #WashingtonTwins. Media outlets began running side-by-side comparisons of the twins' academic records alongside the discrimination they faced. Morning show hosts debated whether their treatment would have been different if they'd been white teenagers or if they'd been traveling with their famous father. A flashback to 6 months earlier played in Jasmine's mind as she watched the social media storm unfold on her phone. She and Isaiah had been sitting in her father's home office when he received news about a major industry award. "This recognition is important," Malcolm had told them, "not just for me, but because it creates space for others who look like us. With privilege comes responsibility. Whatever platforms you gain in life, use them to speak for those who aren't heard." Now, as hashtags about them multiplied, Jasmine understood more deeply what her father meant. Their personal humiliation was becoming a national conversation about race and belonging. On the financial front, the impact was immediate. As trading hours continued, SkylineAir's stock dropped 4% in just 30 minutes as investors reacted to the viral story. Customer service lines were flooded with passengers threatening to cancel bookings, and the #boycott_SkylineAir gained momentum. Inside the plane, still parked at the gate, the mood had shifted. Several passengers were openly filming now, and some had connected the dots about the twins' identity. Bradley Reynolds, who had been making disparaging comments, suddenly went quiet as he scrolled through his phone and realized exactly who he had been insulting, and more importantly, who their father was. The twins sat quietly, both uncomfortable with the attention but determined to stand their ground as their father had instructed. Heather and Kevin, the flight attendants, huddled near the galley, clearly discussing the situation as they also checked their phones. "Do you think this is having the impact Dad expected?" Isaiah whispered. "I think it's bigger," Jasmine replied softly. "Look at the view counts. What's your reaction to how this is unfolding? Comment number 1 if you believe the airline staff should be immediately fired, or number 2 if you think they deserve a chance to apologize and learn from this experience. Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced something similar, and subscribe to follow this story to its conclusion. The question is, with the Washington twins' humiliation now trending nationwide, will Skyline Air realize the magnitude of their mistake before it's too late? And what exactly is Malcolm Washington planning? The answer might surprise you. At exactly 2:37 p.m., as Malcolm Washington's private jet taxied for takeoff, he made the call that would transform a single incident of discrimination into a corporate crisis. "James, execute the maintenance protocol we discussed." His voice was calm but left no room for questions. "Consider it done," replied his CTO. "Estimated impact in 3 minutes." Malcolm ended the call and gazed out the window at the Atlanta skyline. He hadn't wanted to take such drastic measures, but Skyline Air's CEO Harold Blackman had failed to call back within the promised timeframe. Now the airline would learn a painful lesson about the true cost of discrimination. Unknown to most of the traveling public, Washington Digital Enterprises provided the backbone software that managed everything from ticketing to flight operations for 17 major airlines, including Skyline Air. The company's proprietary platform, AirOps, processed millions of transactions daily. Malcolm's team had just initiated an emergency system health verification, essentially placing the entire system in limited functionality mode. Inside Skyline Air's operations center in Dallas, the effect was immediate and alarming. Screens that normally displayed green status indicators began flashing yellow, then red. Booking systems slowed to a crawl. Gate assignments froze. Flight plans became inaccessible. "What the hell is happening?" demanded Operations Director Linda Mercer, watching as the domino effect rippled through their network. A systems administrator frantically typed commands into his terminal. "It's Washington Digital's AirOps platform. It's gone into emergency maintenance mode. I can't override it." "That's impossible. There was nothing on the maintenance schedule. Call their support line." The administrator's face paled as he read the automated response. The message says it's a critical security verification, triggered by potential terms of service violations regarding non-discrimination compliance. Linda's blood ran cold. She'd just received a briefing about a situation involving 2 African American teenagers in first class on Flight 372. "Get me everything you have on the passengers of that Boston flight. Now." Meanwhile, at Atlanta International Airport, the effects of the system limitation were becoming visible on departure boards throughout the terminals. Flights scheduled for imminent departure suddenly showed "delayed" system verification beside them. Within minutes, the ripple effect had grown to nearly 100 delayed flights. On Flight 372, Captain Raymond Simmons received an alert from dispatch. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced over the PA system, "I've just been informed that we need to return to the gate due to a system-wide technical issue. Please remain seated until further instructions." A collective groan rose from the passengers. "This is ridiculous," Bradley Reynolds complained loudly. "Some of us have important meetings to get to." In the cockpit, Captain Simmons was receiving increasingly alarming messages. The dispatcher informed him that this wasn't an isolated incident, the entire airline was experiencing a system-wide slowdown. Even more concerning, an unscheduled FAA maintenance inspection had been ordered for their aircraft specifically. Back in the terminal, Skyline Air's regional director Sharon Miller was having the worst day of her 20-year career. Hundreds of passengers were stranded, the booking system was barely functional, and the FAA had suddenly ordered immediate inspections on multiple aircraft. Her phone rang. It was the CEO himself. "Sharon, listen carefully," Harold Blackman said, his voice unusually tense. "Do you have 2 teenagers named Washington on Flight 372? Washington? I don't know, but we have bigger problems right now. The entire system is. Find out immediately. Those teenagers are the children of Malcolm Washington. There was a moment of stunned silence before Sharon made the connection. Washington, as in Washington Digital Enterprises? The company that runs our... Yes. And I have reason to believe our current system issues are directly related to how his children were treated on that flight. Get to the gate. Personally escort those kids off the plane. Whatever they say happened, apologize for it. I'm on my way to Atlanta now. Sharon immediately dispatched the airline's customer service director and corporate security team to Gate A17 where Flight 372 had returned. As they hurried through the terminal, screens everywhere displayed the growing chaos, now over 200 delayed flights and counting. On board the aircraft, the twins watched as Captain Simmons emerged from the cockpit looking distinctly uncomfortable. He approached their row, his previous authoritarian demeanor notably absent. "Mr. and Miss Washington," he said quietly, "I've been informed that there are some people from corporate headquarters here to speak with you. Would you please gather your belongings?" Isaiah looked at Jasmine, who nodded slightly. They collected their carry-on items and followed the captain to the front of the plane. As they passed Bradley Reynolds, the businessman who had made derogatory comments earlier, he suddenly stood up. "Excuse me," he said, extending a business card. Bradley Reynolds, Chief Operating Officer at Meridian Manufacturing. "I believe we got off on the wrong foot. If there's anything I can do to..." "No, thank you," Jasmine replied coolly without taking the card. Isaiah added, "We've already documented your comments, sir. Our father's legal team will be in touch if necessary." Reynolds' face blanched as they continued toward the exit. At the gate, a group of airline executives and security personnel waited. Sharon Miller stepped forward, her corporate smile firmly in place despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "Miss and Mr. Washington, I'm Sharon Miller, Regional Director for Skyline Air. I want to personally apologize for any misunderstanding that occurred today. We would like to invite you to our premium lounge while we sort out this technical difficulty." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Jasmine replied evenly. "It was discrimination. And I believe our father is already on his way." Sharon's smile faltered. "Yes, we've been informed. If you'll follow me, we can wait for him in comfort and discuss how to make this right." As they walked through the terminal, the twins could see the growing chaos. Lines stretched from every customer service desk. Gate agents were besieged by angry passengers. On every screen, the number of delayed flights continued to climb. 500 and counting, Isaiah murmured, looking at a departures board that was now a sea of red, delayed notifications. "Did Dad really do this?" Jasmine whispered. "Would you expect anything less?" In the airport's VIP lounge, the twins were offered every amenity, premium refreshments, comfortable seating, profuse apologies. Sharon Miller's phone buzzed constantly with increasingly desperate messages from other airports and executive staff. Each time she checked it, her face grew more strained. "Your father's plane has landed," she finally announced. "He's on his way here now." Jasmine nodded. "Then I suggest you prepare your explanation very carefully." Outside in the main terminal, Malcolm Washington strode purposefully through the crowds, flanked by his legal team. Behind him, thousands of stranded passengers checked phones and watches, unaware that the solution to their travel woes rested with the distinguished man in the tailored suit who had just arrived to defend his children. Malcolm Washington's presence commanded attention as he entered the airport's executive lounge. At 6'2" with impeccable posture, wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, he moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to controlling rooms much larger than this one. Behind him walked 4 people carrying briefcases, his legal team, led by Terrence Mitchell, the company's chief counsel. The moment he saw his children, Malcolm's professional mask softened slightly. He embraced them both, checking them visually for any sign of distress. "Are you okay?" he asked quietly. "We're fine, Dad," Isaiah assured him, though the slight tremor in his voice suggested otherwise. "They didn't make us leave our seats," Jasmine added. "We did exactly what you said." Malcolm nodded, pride evident in his eyes. Then, as if someone had flipped a switch, his expression hardened again as he turned to face Sharon Miller and the airline executives who had assembled in the lounge. "Mr. Washington," Sharon began, extending her hand. "I'm Sharon Miller, Regional Director for Skyline Air. We want to express our deepest." Malcolm ignored her outstretched hand. "Where are the flight attendants and pilot from Flight 372? Sharon's smile faltered. "They're being debriefed about the technical issues affecting our—" "I didn't ask about technical issues," Malcolm interrupted, his voice dangerously calm. "I asked for the staff who discriminated against my children. Bring them here. Now." The authority in his voice left no room for negotiation. Sharon nodded to an assistant, who hurried away. Malcolm turned to Terence, who handed him a tablet. "While we wait," Malcolm said, "let me show you something." He turned the tablet toward Sharon, displaying real-time data about Skyline Air's operations. The screen showed a staggering 578 delayed flights, 212 cancellations, and estimated losses already exceeding $15 million. This is happening because Washington Digital's AirOps platform is currently running at minimum required capacity during an emergency system verification, Malcolm explained. The verification was triggered automatically when our terms of service monitoring detected potential discrimination against protected individuals. Sharon paled. "Mr. Washington, surely we can resolve this without—" "Without what?" "Without consequences." Malcolm's voice remained measured but carried throughout the room. "My children were humiliated. They were told they didn't belong in seats they had every right to occupy. They were threatened with removal from the plane despite doing nothing wrong." At that moment, Heather Brooks, Kevin Porter, and Captain Raymond Simmons were escorted into the lounge by airline security. They looked confused and uncomfortable. "These are the employees in question?" Malcolm asked. Sharon nodded. Malcolm approached them. "I'm Malcolm Washington. The two teenagers you harassed in first class are my children." Recognition and alarm flashed across their faces. Captain Simmons stepped forward. "Sir, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. We received reports of disruptive behavior." "From whom?" Malcolm interrupted. "My children were sitting quietly. We have video evidence from multiple passengers showing they did nothing wrong. What we do have evidence of is your flight attendant approaching them with immediate suspicion, providing substandard service compared to other passengers, and your collective decision to threaten removal without cause." Heather fidgeted nervously. "Sir, we treat all passengers the same." "Don't insult my intelligence," Malcolm cut in sharply. "My company processes data from millions of passenger interactions. Skyline Air has a discrimination complaint rate 340% higher than the industry average. This isn't an isolated incident, it's a pattern." The room fell silent. Even the airline executives looked shocked at this revelation. Sharon attempted damage control. "Mr. Washington, we take these allegations very seriously. We'd like to offer your children our sincere apologies, complimentary first-class upgrades for a year, and—" "This isn't about free tickets," Malcolm said. "This is about dignity. This is about my children being treated like human beings deserving of respect. Your offer suggests you still don't understand the problem." The lounge door opened again, and Bradley Reynolds entered, flanked by two airline representatives. He looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Ah," Malcolm said. "The man who made comments about affirmative action and questioned whether my children belonged in first class." Reynolds stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Washington, I'm Bradley Reynolds, COO of Meridian Manufacturing. I want to personally apologize for my comments. I had no idea who your children were." "That's precisely the problem," Malcolm interrupted, again ignoring the outstretched hand. "You shouldn't need to know who their father is to treat them with basic human dignity. The fact that your behavior changed only after learning of their connection to me speaks volumes about your character." Reynolds flushed. Now see here, I'm also an executive of a company that, until 10 minutes ago, had a significant contract with one of my subsidiaries. Malcolm finished for him. My team is already working with Meridian's CEO, who, incidentally, is very concerned about how this incident might affect your company's diversity initiatives and public image. Reynolds' face drained of color. Malcolm turned back to the airline representatives. Here's what's going to happen. First, your airline will issue a public apology to my children, acknowledging the discriminatory treatment they received. Terrence Mitchell stepped forward, opening his briefcase. We've taken the liberty of drafting appropriate language. Malcolm continued. Second, these 3 employees will be placed on administrative leave pending a thorough investigation and retraining. Third, Skyline Air will implement a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff, which my diversity and inclusion team will help develop. Mr. Washington, Sharon began cautiously, some of these demands would require approval from our CEO and board. Harold Blackman's plane lands in 20 minutes, Malcolm replied. And as for your board, you should know that through various investment vehicles, I control approximately 8% of Skyline Air's voting shares. I've already spoken with 3 other major shareholders who share my concerns about how this incident might impact the company's value. The executives exchanged alarmed glances. Finally, Malcolm said, Skyline Air will establish a scholarship fund for minority students interested in aviation careers, with an initial endowment of at least $10 million. Sharon looked like she might faint. Mr. Washington, while we deeply regret this incident, these terms are non-negotiable, Malcolm finished firmly. And until we have a signed agreement, I'm afraid that system verification will continue. He gestured toward a large screen in the lounge displaying airport operations, where the number of affected flights had now climbed above 600. As if on cue, Jasmine spoke up for the first time since her father's arrival. Dad, can I say something? Malcolm nodded, his expression softening again. Jasmine turned to face the airline representatives. What happened to us today happens to people who look like us every day, in airports, stores, restaurants, and schools across this country. The only difference is that most of them don't have a father who can shut down an airline to make it stop. When you apologize to us, you're apologizing to all of them too. So make it count. The room fell silent, the power of her words hanging in the air. Isaiah placed a supportive hand on his sister's shoulder, standing with her in unity. Malcolm looked at his children with unmistakable pride before turning back to the airline executives. My daughter just taught you something more valuable than anything in your corporate training manuals. I suggest you listen. The sleek conference room in the Atlanta airport's executive terminal had been hastily converted into negotiation headquarters. On one side of the polished mahogany table sat Malcolm Washington, flanked by his twins and his legal team. On the opposite side, Skyline Air CEO Harold Blackman had arrived, visibly exhausted from his emergency flight. Beside him were Sharon Miller, the airline's general counsel Peter Montgomery, and their chief diversity officer, Dr. Lisa Chen, who had been summoned from vacation. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the operations board still displayed hundreds of delayed flights across the Skyline Air network. The financial impact was mounting by the minute. Thank you for meeting with us, Malcolm, Blackman began, his voice professionally cordial despite the circumstances. I want to personally apologize to Jasmine and Isaiah for their experience today. It's completely unacceptable and not representative of our company values. Malcolm nodded but remained silent, waiting. Blackman cleared his throat uncomfortably. We've reviewed your proposals. While we appreciate your concerns, some of the terms are quite extensive. Perhaps we could discuss a more reasonable compromise. Malcolm leaned forward slightly. Harold, let me be clear. This isn't a negotiation where we meet in the middle. My children were humiliated in front of a plane full of passengers because of their race. That's not something I take lightly. With all due respect, Peter Montgomery interjected, we haven't confirmed that race was a factor in this incident. Jasmine, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Excuse me, but when the flight attendant approached us, her first words were asking if we were in the right section, despite us already being settled in our assigned seats. No other passengers received this question. When we ordered sparkling water, we weren't given napkins like everyone else. When a white passenger spilled his drink, the attendant rushed to help. When my brother had a small spill, he was reprimanded." She pulled out her tablet and placed it on the table. "I documented 13 distinct instances where we received different treatment than white passengers in first class, all within a 90-minute period." Dr. Chen, the diversity officer, looked genuinely disturbed. "May I see that documentation?" As Jasmine shared her observations, Isaiah added, "We followed our father's advice to remain calm, polite, and document everything. We didn't raise our voices or argue, even when we were threatened with removal." Malcolm watched his children with pride as they articulated their experience with composure and precision. He then turned back to the airline executives. "My terms aren't punitive, Harold. They're constructive. The scholarship program, for instance, creates opportunities while improving your company's diversity pipeline." Terrence Mitchell, Malcolm's chief counsel, distributed tablets to everyone at the table. "We've prepared a detailed proposal. The first section addresses immediate actions, including a public statement acknowledging the incident and apologizing to the Washington family." Peter Montgomery scanned the document, frowning. "This calls for the immediate suspension of 3 employees without due process. They'll receive full pay during the investigation," Malcolm countered. "And speaking of due process, would you like me to play the recordings of what was said to my children? Or perhaps we should review the social media videos that are already trending?" Harold Blackman raised a hand in surrender. "That won't be necessary. We agree to place the employees on administrative leave pending investigation." Dr. Chen spoke up, "I'm actually interested in the anti-bias training program you're proposing. Our current program clearly has deficiencies if this incident occurred despite it." Malcolm nodded. "My foundation has developed evidence-based training that's been implemented at several Fortune 500 companies with measurable results." As the negotiations continued, Isaiah, who had been quieter than his sister, suddenly spoke. "May I make a suggestion?" All eyes turned to the teenager, who adjusted his glasses before continuing. "Instead of just suspending the flight attendants and pilot, what if they became part of the solution?" He looked directly at the airline executives. "What if, after appropriate training, they helped develop and implement the new program? They could share their experience and what they learned from it." Dr. Chen looked thoughtful. "A restorative justice approach rather than purely punitive. That's, actually quite innovative." Malcolm looked at his son with a mixture of surprise and admiration. Isaiah had always been more reserved than Jasmine, but his suggestion demonstrated a depth of understanding beyond his years. Jasmine built on her brother's idea. "And what if Washington Digital and Skyline Air created a joint internship program for students interested in both aviation and technology? It could be part of the scholarship initiative." Harold Blackman's expression changed from defensive to genuinely interested. "That's actually an excellent idea. We've been looking to modernize our tech infrastructure and attract young talent." Malcolm watched as his children transformed what had begun as a crisis management meeting into a collaborative planning session. They were applying lessons he had taught them about using influence and privilege to create systemic change rather than simply seeking personal vindication. The negotiation continued for another 2 hours, with specific terms hammered out for each component of the agreement. The scholarship program would start with a $15 million endowment, more than Malcolm had initially demanded. The anti-bias training would be comprehensive, with quarterly assessments and accountability metrics. A joint technology internship would be established, with priority given to students from underrepresented groups. As the final details were being discussed, Malcolm glanced at the operations board visible through the window. Hundreds of flights remained delayed, thousands of passengers stranded. "Harold," he said, "once we sign this agreement, how quickly can your operations return to normal?" The airline's CEO looked grim. "Even if your system comes back online immediately, we're looking at cascading delays throughout our network. Probably 24 to 36 hours before we're back on schedule." Malcolm turned to Terrence, who nodded and made a call. "The system verification will end as soon as we sign. Additionally, we'll provide emergency technical support to help expedite the recovery." Harold Blackman appeared visibly relieved. "Thank you. That will help tremendously." As the legal teams finalized the document language, Malcolm took a moment to speak privately with his children. "I'm incredibly proud of both of you," he said quietly. "Not just for how you handled yourselves on the plane, but for how you've transformed this confrontation into something constructive." "We learned from watching you, Dad," Jasmine replied. Isaiah nodded. "You always said true power isn't about punishing others, it's about creating change." Malcolm smiled at his children, seeing in them the leaders they were already becoming. When he'd built his company from nothing, fighting against prejudice and barriers at every turn, he dreamed that his success might someday shield his children from facing the same discrimination. Today had proven that dream incomplete, but it had also shown that he had given them something more valuable: the tools, confidence, and wisdom to transform painful experiences into positive change. As they returned to the table to sign the final agreement, Malcolm knew this incident would ultimately create ripples far beyond one airline or one family. The Washington twins had turned their humiliation into an opportunity for institutional change, a lesson more powerful than anything he could have taught them himself. The crowded press room at Atlanta International Airport buzzed with anticipation. Camera crews jostled for position as journalists checked recording equipment and compared notes about the extraordinary events of the past 12 hours. At exactly 9 a.m., Skyline Air CEO Harold Blackman stepped to the podium, flanked by Malcolm Washington and his twins. "Good morning," Blackman began, his voice solemn. "I'm here to address an incident that occurred yesterday on Skyline Air Flight 372. Two young passengers, Jasmine and Isaiah Washington, experienced treatment that fell far short of our stated values and expectations." Cameras clicked rapidly as he continued. "After careful review of the evidence, we acknowledge that these passengers were subjected to discriminatory treatment based on racial bias. On behalf of Skyline Air and all our employees, I offer our sincerest apology to the Washington family." Malcolm stood impassively, his hand resting supportively on Jasmine's shoulder. Isaiah maintained perfect posture beside them, his expression carefully neutral. "This incident has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about our company culture and training practices," Blackman admitted. "As a result, Skyline Air is announcing several immediate actions." He outlined the comprehensive agreement reached during negotiations, the new training programs, the suspension of the employees involved pending investigation, and the establishment of the scholarship fund. Finally, Blackman concluded, "I want to thank Malcolm Washington for his willingness to work with us constructively despite the distress caused to his family. His commitment to transforming this incident into an opportunity for positive change speaks volumes about his character." When Malcolm stepped to the microphone, the room fell silent. His commanding presence needed no introduction. "Thank you, Harold. I appreciate your acknowledgement and commitment to action." He paused, surveying the room. "But I didn't ask to speak today. My children did." Surprised murmurs rippled through the press corps as Malcolm stepped back, yielding the podium to Jasmine and Isaiah. The teenagers approached with confidence that belied their 17 years. "Good morning," Jasmine began, her voice clear and steady. "What happened to us yesterday happens to people who look like us every day across this country. The only difference is that most of them don't have a father who can hold a corporation accountable." Isaiah continued seamlessly, "We're not here to seek sympathy or special treatment. We're here because we believe this incident highlights systemic issues that deserve attention and action." The twins proceeded to articulate, with remarkable poise, their experience and their hopes for the changes being implemented. They described the scholarship program not as compensation for their mistreatment but as an investment in a future where such incidents would become increasingly rare. In the audience, journalism professor Walter Henderson leaned toward his colleague, whispering, "These kids are extraordinary. Most adults couldn't handle this situation with such grace. As the press conference concluded, requests for interviews poured in. College admissions officers from Harvard, MIT, Stanford, and Yale, all schools the twins had been considering, reached out directly to express interest in their applications. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the wheels of change had already begun turning. In a conference room elsewhere in the airport, Dr. Lisa Chen, Skyline Air's diversity officer, sat with Terrence Mitchell from Malcolm's team, reviewing the implementation timeline for the new training programs. "We want to start with the customer-facing staff first," Chen explained. "Flight attendants, gate agents, customer service representatives." "Agreed," Mitchell replied. "But we also need to address management. Culture flows from the top down." In another part of the airport, Heather Brooks, the flight attendant whose actions had triggered the incident, sat alone in an employee lounge, watching the press conference on television. Her face registered a complex mix of emotions: defensiveness, shame, and confusion. Kevin Porter, the head flight attendant, entered and sat beside her. "They're saying we'll be part of the new training development, assuming we complete the program ourselves." Heather's voice was tight. "I wasn't being racist. I was just following protocol for disruptive passengers." "Were they actually disruptive though?" Kevin asked quietly. "Or did we just assume they would be?" Heather didn't answer, but her expression suggested the question had struck home. Captain Raymond Simmons had a different reaction. Watching the press conference in the pilot's lounge, he bristled at what he perceived as corporate capitulation. "This is ridiculous. They're throwing us under the bus to appease some tech billionaire." A senior pilot nearby shook his head. "Ray, I've reviewed the incident reports. Those kids were seated properly, had their seatbelts on, and were speaking at normal volume. On what grounds were you threatening to remove them?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. Across the terminal, Bradley Reynolds, the businessman who had made derogatory comments about the twins, was facing his own reckoning. His phone rang constantly with calls from his company's CEO, board members, and PR team. Word had reached Meridian Manufacturing's leadership about his behavior, and damage control was in full swing. "The board is meeting this afternoon," his CEO informed him coldly. "Your comments have potentially jeopardized our relationship with Washington digital subsidiaries, not to mention our public image. I suggest you prepare a very compelling explanation." By late afternoon, the Washington family prepared to continue their original journey to Boston for the college tours. Malcolm had arranged for a private jet, but Isaiah surprised him by suggesting they take a regular Skyline Air flight instead. "Are you sure?" Malcolm asked, concern evident in his voice. "I think it's important," Isaiah replied. "To show we're not afraid and that we believe in the changes being implemented." Jasmine nodded in agreement. "Plus, it sends a message to other kids who look like us. We belong in these spaces, Dad. We shouldn't have to avoid them because of what happened." Malcolm studied his children with immense pride. "You continue to amaze me. Both of you." As they headed toward their gate, first-class tickets in hand, Jasmine received an email notification on her phone. It was from the admissions director at MIT. "Dear Ms. Washington, I was deeply impressed by your composure and articulation during today's press conference. Your research in artificial intelligence has already caught our attention, and your demonstrated leadership under pressure further convinces me that you would be a valuable addition to our community. I would like to personally invite you to meet with our AI research faculty during your visit to Boston." Jasmine showed the email to her father and brother, her eyes wide with excitement. "Dad, do you think this would have happened without, everything that happened yesterday?" Malcolm considered the question carefully. "Your brilliance and hard work would have opened doors regardless. But sometimes, how we handle adversity reveals character in ways that transcripts and test scores never could." As they continued toward their gate, they passed Heather Brooks, who was leaving a meeting with HR. Their eyes met briefly, and after a moment's hesitation, Heather approached. "Mr. Washington, Jasmine, Isaiah, she began awkwardly. I wanted to apologize personally for my behavior yesterday. I'm beginning to understand how my actions affected you, and I'm truly sorry. The apology was imperfect, there was still a defensive undertone, a lack of full comprehension, but it was a start. A beginning of the longer journey toward understanding that lay ahead. Thank you, Ms. Brooks, Jasmine replied simply. I hope the training program will be valuable for you. As they walked away, Isaiah whispered, do you think she really gets it? Not yet, Malcolm replied quietly. But awareness is the first step. You can't fix what you don't acknowledge. Their new flight to Boston departed on time, with a very different reception in first class. The crew, hyper-aware of their identity, were almost comically attentive. While the exaggerated courtesy wasn't exactly normal treatment either, Malcolm reminded his children that systems don't change overnight. Real change is a marathon, not a sprint, he told them as their plane climbed into the clear blue sky. What matters is that the journey has begun. 6 months after the incident that briefly paralyzed Skyline Air's operations, Jasmine Washington stood at a podium in the carrier's corporate headquarters. Behind her, a large screen displayed the Skyline Air Academy logo, a stylized aircraft ascending alongside the words, "Rising Together." Before her sat the airline's first graduating class of diversity and inclusion ambassadors, including a familiar face, Heather Brooks. When my brother and I boarded that flight half a year ago, we couldn't have imagined where that journey would lead, Jasmine began. What began as an incident of discrimination has transformed into an industry-leading initiative that many other airlines are now working to replicate. The transformation hadn't been easy or instant. In the weeks following the incident, Skyline Air had faced intense scrutiny. Passenger numbers had dropped temporarily, and shareholder meetings had been tense. But Harold Blackman, to his credit, had embraced the opportunity for genuine change rather than mere crisis management. The training program, developed with input from the Washington twins and Malcolm's Foundation, had expanded beyond initial expectations. What started as anti-bias training for customer-facing staff had evolved into a comprehensive education program addressing systemic inequities throughout the company. Jasmine continued her address, the most powerful change comes when we transform adversaries into allies. 6 months ago, some people in this room saw my brother and me as out of place, as not belonging. Today, we're collaborating as partners. In the audience, Heather Brooks listened attentively. Her journey had been perhaps the most remarkable. Initially defensive and reluctant to acknowledge any bias, she had gradually opened herself to uncomfortable truths. The turning point had come when, as part of her training, she'd been paired with a black flight attendant who shared his daily experiences of subtle discrimination. After Jasmine's speech, Heather approached the podium to share her perspective. I've worked for Skyline Air for 15 years, she began, her voice slightly tremulous. For most of that time, I considered myself colorblind. I believed I treated all passengers equally. What I've learned through this program is that claiming not to see color actually prevented me from seeing patterns in my own behavior. She paused, gathering herself. When I approached Jasmine and Isaiah that day, I didn't consciously think, these black teenagers don't belong in first class. But I questioned their presence in a way I never would have with white teenagers. I made assumptions about their behavior before they'd done anything wrong. That's what implicit bias looks like in action. Across town, at Washington Digital's headquarters, Isaiah sat with his father, watching the live stream of the event. Now 18 and in his final semester of high school, Isaiah had already been accepted to Harvard Law School's special 3+3 BA/JD program with a full scholarship. She's really come a long way, Isaiah observed, referring to Heather. Malcolm nodded. People can surprise you when given the opportunity to grow. The incident had affected Isaiah's career plans significantly. Originally intending to follow his father into technology entrepreneurship, he had pivoted towards civil rights law, inspired by the power of legal frameworks to effect systemic change. Dad, Isaiah said quietly as they continued watching, do you think we would have learned these lessons any other way? Malcolm considered the question thoughtfully. Some lessons can only be learned through experience. I wish you and your sister hadn't had to face discrimination to understand its reality, but I'm proud of how you've transformed that experience into positive change. The Skyline Air Scholarship Program had already awarded its first round of grants to 50 students from underrepresented groups interested in aviation careers. The program included not only financial support but mentorship, internships, and guaranteed job interviews upon graduation. The first cohort included students from backgrounds traditionally excluded from the industry, not only racial minorities but also first-generation college students from low-income communities. The airline industry as a whole had taken notice. 3 other major carriers had approached Washington Digital to help develop similar training programs. The Federal Aviation Administration had convened a task force on inclusivity in aviation, with Malcolm serving as an advisor. What had begun as one family's confrontation with discrimination had catalyzed an industry-wide examination of practices and policies. Perhaps most surprisingly, Bradley Reynolds, the businessman who had made derogatory comments about the twins, had undergone his own transformation. After nearly losing his position at Meridian Manufacturing, he had been given a second chance, contingent on meaningful personal growth. He'd reached out to Malcolm, asking to meet with the twins to apologize in person. That meeting, initially tense, had evolved into an unexpected collaboration. Reynolds, genuinely shaken by his brush with consequences, had begun examining other areas of his company's operations for bias. He'd discovered significant disparities in hiring, promotion, and pay that had previously gone unaddressed. With guidance from Washington Digital's diversity team, Meridian had instituted sweeping changes. Sometimes, Malcolm had told his children after that meeting, your greatest allies can come from the most unexpected places. Captain Raymond Simmons had taken longer to come around. Initially resistant to the training program and resentful of what he perceived as special treatment, he'd remained skeptical until a senior black pilot he respected had taken him aside for a frank conversation. That discussion, and subsequent ones, had slowly opened his eyes to realities he'd never had to consider. While still not entirely comfortable with the topic, he'd begun the journey toward greater understanding. On campus at MIT, where Jasmine had ultimately decided to attend college, she had become something of a campus celebrity. Her algorithm for detecting bias in artificial intelligence systems had won the Freshman Innovation Award, and she'd been invited to present at conferences alongside graduate students and faculty. The irony, she told her father during one of their weekly video calls, is that I never would have focused on bias in AI if I hadn't experienced it so directly myself. Sometimes our greatest contributions come from our deepest wounds. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, the Washington family gathered for dinner at their Atlanta home. Malcolm had just returned from a speaking engagement at the National Aviation Conference, where he'd shared the stage with Harold Blackman to discuss the transformation at Skyline Air. Leona, the twins' mother, had taken a rare evening off from her duties as chief of neurosurgery. I have news, Malcolm announced as they enjoyed dessert. The Skyline Air training program is being adopted by the Department of Transportation as a model for all federally regulated transportation providers. That's wonderful, Leona said, squeezing her husband's hand. What started as protection for our children is now helping thousands. Jasmine and Isaiah exchanged glances. Actually, Jasmine said, we have news too. She explained that she and Isaiah had been approached about writing a book about their experience and the changes it had sparked. Several publishers had expressed interest, seeing it as both a cautionary tale and a hopeful roadmap for institutional change. We want to call it First-Class Citizens, Isaiah explained. It's about claiming the spaces we deserve while transforming them for those who'll come after us. Malcolm studied his children thoughtfully. At 18, they carried themselves with a maturity and purpose that many adults never achieved. The incident that might have left them traumatized or bitter had instead catalyzed their growth into powerful advocates. I'm reminded of something my grandfather used to say, Malcolm told them. The true measure of power isn't in how you flex it, but in how you use it to lift others. Jasmine smiled. We learned that from you, Dad. As the conversation continued into the evening, they discussed their upcoming plans. The following week, they would all fly to Washington, D.C. for the official launch of the National Transportation Equity Initiative, a direct outgrowth of the Skyline Air incident. The twins would give the keynote address, with transportation industry leaders, civil rights advocates, and government officials in attendance. "When you board that flight to D.C., Malcolm said with a smile, "I guarantee no one will question whether you belong in first class." "Probably not," Isaiah agreed. "But our work isn't about making sure we're comfortable. It's about making sure everyone who looks like us can expect the same treatment, whether their father is a CEO or not." Leona raised her glass. To transforming moments of injustice into lasting change. As they clinked glasses, Malcolm reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. What had begun with his children being humiliated in first class had cascaded into changes affecting thousands of employees and millions of passengers. The incident had been painful. But its impact reached far beyond what he could have engineered through his corporate influence alone. Outside, through the dining room windows, they could see planes taking off from Atlanta International Airport, their lights tracing paths across the night sky. Each one carried people from diverse backgrounds and circumstances, all deserving of equal dignity and respect. Thanks to one family's courage in the face of discrimination, more of them would receive it. This story teaches us that confronting discrimination requires both courage and strategic action. The Washington twins demonstrated dignity under pressure by documenting mistreatment rather than responding emotionally. Their father Malcolm showed that effective advocacy means using available resources and influence to create systemic change, not just personal vindication. True leadership transforms adversity into opportunity. Rather than simply punishing those who wronged them, the Washington family created lasting institutional change through education, scholarships, and mentorship programs. They recognize that sustainable progress comes through converting opponents into allies through understanding rather than shame. Perhaps most importantly, the story illustrates how privilege carries responsibility. Malcolm's power gave him leverage others lack when facing discrimination. By using that advantage to benefit those without similar resources, he demonstrated that true justice extends beyond personal vindication to lifting others. The ultimate measure of success wasn't revenge but transformation, of individuals, institutions, and an entire industry. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it? Or perhaps you've experienced it yourself? Share your story in the comments below. Would you have handled the situation like Malcolm did, or taken a different approach? Comment dignity if you believe the twins' composure was their greatest strength, or power if you think their father's influence was most crucial. Don't forget to hit that like button if this story made you think about how we can all be agents of positive change. Subscribe for more powerful stories of justice and transformation, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that one voice can make all the difference. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the fight against discrimination, we all have a role to play. What will yours be?